Hello, and welcome to Dr. Louise Thinks. My name is Dr. Louise, and this is a channel dedicated to helping everyday folks connect with the healing power of philosophy. Today we are in my sunroom, so we're trying a new location for a little bit different of a video. So if you haven't heard, if you're not based in the US, you might not know that there was an election this week, and some things happened. It was a little intense. So rather than doing a traditional scripted video like I've been doing on the channel, I want to talk a little bit more informally about some of the things I've been thinking about this week from philosophy that I think might speak to some of the things US citizens especially might be feeling, and kind of more generally stuff that might help us whenever we're dealing with big changes on a big scale. So for today, I want to talk about some Buddhist philosophy. So if you don't know, my background is actually in philosophy of mind and Buddhist philosophy specifically. And I want to talk about two concepts in Buddhism that I think can really offer a little bit of soothing to us right now. And those concepts are interdependence and impermanence. Now, these are two concepts that they're not unique to Buddhism, but the way we're going to talk about it today is specific to Buddhist philosophy. They are both concepts that you usually talk about together. And one of the reasons you do that is neither concept is too challenging to understand. We're going to follow the tradition and we're going to talk about the two of them together. So the first one is impermanence. In its simplest form, impermanence is just the idea that everything is always changing. So in Buddhist philosophy, this is a really important concept because one of the things Buddhist philosophers are arguing against is like this concept of the soul, right? Usually the soul is an idea that there's some like deep inherent thing about you that stays the same, that persists over time. The Christian perspective, the soul is usually something of God that is in you, and that is where we find what we really are on the Christian perspective. There is a parallel view in the Hindu tradition, which is mostly what the Buddhist philosophers were engaged in. One of the things that the Buddhists were arguing is that there is no thing in you or about you or of you that is permanent, that is not in some way subject to change. Now, different flavors of Buddhism had different metaphysical accounts for how it is that everything is always changing. But we could deep dive into that, and if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. There is some interesting conversations to have there. But if we take impermanence kind of a little bit more on its surface, and we just think about the idea of change, it's got a lot of intuitive appeal, right? It is hard to find things in the world or in us that do not change at all, right? Like, it seems like most things in the world change some. Usually, though, we are not either very aware of those changes or we assume those changes are not very important. However, on the Buddhist picture, it is like a very deep, important point that everything is always changing. We want to dismiss it. We want to say it's not that big a deal that stuff changes, but the Buddhists are going to say you're just not thinking about it enough. It's actually very significant that everything is always changing. So I want to talk about what that looks like a little bit when we're thinking kind of about some of the election stuff that just happened in the United States. One thing, if everything is impermanent, if everything is always changing, we should notice some things about the current environment we're in. First of all, Trump is changing right now. He is not the same as he was in his previous presidency. And he in fact is changing. He has changed today in a way that makes him different from yesterday. And he is going to continue to change as we move into his presidency. The same can be said of us. We are changing. We are very different than we were during Trump's previous presidency. We are also going to be different in a few months when President Trump comes into office. And throughout his presidency, we will also be changing, right? There is no constant in this. Everything is always changing. In fact, the political climate itself and how the political landscape is currently changing even as we speak, and it's going to continue to change. So this is important because what's tempting to do right now is to kind of make a lot of assumptions and maybe start to make some predictions about what's going to happen when Trump becomes president. And that's a totally normal thing to do. And I'm not saying necessarily that we shouldn't try to think about what's ahead of us, but it is important to notice that because everything is always changing, it is difficult to make predictions. It is difficult to just use the facts of what happened in the past to try to tell us what is going to happen in the future. All of this stuff is in a lot of flux, a lot more flux than we're usually conscious of, right? So the more we think about how much things are changing and have been changing and will continue to change, the easier it's going to be to have some healthy skepticism about any kind of predictions or assumptions about what is going to happen in the future. This is in part how in Buddhist philosophy, there's this very strong recommendation that folks focus on living in the present moment, right? Rather than getting lost in facts about the past or predicting and imagining things in the future, the recommendation here is, okay, everything is changing. So the only thing that we really have is this moment. That's what's for sure. And the more we can just be present in this moment, the more we're not going to accidentally create more suffering by being stuck in the past or projecting, our fears into the future. So impermanence is importantly connected to the Buddhist idea of being present in this moment. Okay, so that's the concept of impermanence, right? That everything is always changing. Now I want to talk about a related idea called interdependence. Now, its most basic form, interdependence, is the idea that nothing exists independently, right? So the opposite way to say that is like everything depends on everything else. Now that sounds kind of weird. It's not very intuitive at first. So to kind of help us understand and wrap our mind around interdependence, I want to bring in some Thích Nhất Hạnh. He is a very famous Buddhist philosopher. He is Vietnamese, and he was very involved in reconciling Buddhism at the time during the Vietnam War, and he actually created a movement within the Buddhist community called Engaged Buddhism, which is a kind of Buddhism where you directly engage in the challenges of the world, maybe like the wars or the politics of what's going on. That was a relatively new idea within the Buddhist tradition, which there have been Buddhists in many traditions that did engage in the world, but as a movement, this one, Engaged Buddhism, is really emphasizing the necessity of Buddhists to be involved in the world. This is from his book, The Heart of Understanding. And I'm going to read to you a little bit from the chapter on interbeing. Now, I've been talking about interdependence. That is kind of like a metaphysical way to talk about this. Interbeing is also metaphysics, but it's the way Thích Nhất Hạnh explains the same idea. So let's take a look at these couple famous passages from his text. If you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in the sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper are. Interbeing is a word that is not in the dictionary yet. But if we combine the prefix inter with the verb to be, we have a new verb, interbe. Without a cloud, we cannot have paper. So we can say that the cloud and the sheet of paper inter-are. Looking even more deeply, we can see we are in it too. This is not difficult to see because when you look at a sheet of paper, the sheet of paper is part of our perception. Your mind is in here and mine is also. So we can say that everything is in here with this sheet of paper. You cannot point out one thing that is not here. Time, space, the earth, the rain, the minerals in the soil, the sunshine, the cloud, the river, the heat. Everything coexists with this sheet of paper. That is why I think the word interbe should be in the dictionary. To be is to interbe. You cannot just be by yourself alone. You have to interbe with every other thing. This sheet of paper is because everything else is. So here Thích Nhất Hạnh has explained this concept of interbeing. Essentially, whenever we notice something about the world, that thing contains all of the different aspects of the world in it. And the way you can kind of think about this is you can think of the causal chain, all of the stuff that had to exist in order for this particular object to exist now. This is the idea of interdependence. All things in the world depend on all the other things, right? And you can motivate this for yourself if it's feeling a little weird for you, right? Because we don't normally think this way. This is kind of counterintuitive. Usually when we think of, okay, what is a piece of paper? We might think of a tree, and we might think of like the process we use to go from tree to paper, right? And that's kind of the end of usually our thinking about that. But if you go further back into the chain and you think about all the things the tree needed, all of the things in the world that were necessary for this to take place, it becomes easier to see how the existence of this one thing depends on these other things. So, when we're thinking about interdependence in the context of the election and kind of the reality we're facing today, it has a lot of implications if we allow ourselves to go there. One thing that's very tempting in a moment like this is to try to dismiss the problems we're facing, right? It's easy, especially if you're of the mind that a lot of the people who were in favor of the president being elected were coming from a place of hate. You might think this because of the kind of rhetoric that Donald Trump was using in his campaign, right? If you're thinking, okay, these people are just hateful, that's a them problem, that's not a me problem, you are kind of rubbing up against the idea of interdependence. Now, it is true for sure that in a practical way, if you are engaged with someone who is being hateful, you don't necessarily need to be their friend in order to respect interdependence. You don't need to go put yourself in dangerous situations around people who don't think you have the right to exist. That is not a requirement of recognizing interdependence. But instead, in order to recognize kind of the broad picture, right? Let's step back from any particular individual. We need to recognize that the problems here that we're facing, whether it's hate or it's the economy or it's foreign policy, whatever political thing we're thinking about, it's not just a problem for those people. In fact, in Buddhism, we're going to challenge the idea that there is even a difference between me and you, between those people and us. We're going to start to undermine that because it turns out that I am dependent on you and you are dependent on me. We inter-are. That's how Thích Nhất Hạnh would say that. So when we're facing these problems, we have to resist the temptation to say, that's not my problem. Okay? It is an us problem. Where we've gotten to politically, whether you think it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, it is a problem for all of us. It is a thing for all of us to face together. You can make an argument for that if you are American, just on the grounds that we are Americans and we depend on each other in democracy. But you can make a more metaphysical argument that right? Like I cannot exist as I currently do without these other people. And so we are inherently tied together. Our well-being is inherently tied together. The things that I see as problematic in the people who voted differently than me are also a part of me. They are not distinct from me, right? There's much more of a collective picture when you are thinking about interdependence. So this can be a good thing insofar as it can help us take responsibility for the problems as we see them. Right? They're not just someone else's problems. If you think something is going wrong in the situation, then you are a part of that problem and you are also a part of that solution, right? You're invested in the situation differently. Now, I want to reiterate, that does not mean if you are the target of hatred or something like this, that you necessarily need to go out there and be a part of directly engaging with people who are hateful to you. That's not what this is saying. It's a collective problem, right? And sometimes for our personal safety or our mental health, we can't be the ones on the front line of solving any particular problem, but we do need to be mindful when we start to fall into this, what a Buddhist would call dualistic thinking, where I'm fine and I'm good, that's a them thing, and assuming that these are completely separate domains. It's an us problem. It's a problem we've got to work on collectively. So I think that is the invitation of interdependence. And interestingly, I'm not a Buddhist. I studied Buddhist philosophy and I was married to a Buddhist for a while, but I myself do not practice Buddhism. But I'm a Unitarian Universalist. And in that tradition, we also, one of our values is also interdependence. The way we explain it in Unitarian Universalism is a little bit different than the Buddhist picture, a little bit more open-ended, but the core idea is the same, that we are all in this web of existence, and your pain is my pain, and your joy is my joy, and we need to work together so that all of existence, not just the people who think politically like us, not just the people who we are most comfortable with, but actually all human beings can have more love and more joy in their lives. So this is easy to overlook. This is easy to kind of dismiss. A lot of the political rhetoric from both sides of the aisle are invested in creating these kind of divisions between us, right? The rhetoric that is most effective is the kind that says those are the bad guys and those are the good guys. And the concept of interdependence really challenges that. On a deep level, it challenges the idea that we can separate things like that. Because, maybe I have a more liberal perspective, but maybe the person who is helping me, so that I could have this camera today, right? Maybe the guy that made this camera is much more conservative, right? And like his views and my views would not match up, but he is an integral part of what I'm able to do right now. And whatever problems I think he's having, whatever problems he thinks I'm having, these are shared problems. Even though I don't know him, I've never met the person that made this camera. I mean, I imagine it was many people who helped make this camera, but I don't know them, and I'm probably never going to know them. But they are a part of this like web of existence, and the more I can be in touch with the way I am connected to these folks and they are connected to me, the better it's going to be for us and our actual ability to, as a Buddhist would say, reduce the suffering of all sentient beings. So that's how interdependence and impermanence can help us, I think, in this particular moment of political activity, like whatever word you want to use there. This is a very interesting moment to be an American. It's producing a ton of feelings, all of the feelings. I do want to say specifically to my friends and to my viewers who might be feeling scared or nervous about the future, I see you and your fears are very legitimate. I am right there with you, and I'm going to do my best to help bring you the philosophy that I have to help us navigate the next couple months and the next few years. And we're going to do our best to get through this together. one way or another, we'll survive this and we'll get into the next chapter afterward. So if you want to hear how philosophy might be able to help you navigate all of the stuff that's going to be coming up, please go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. And until next time, stay curious, be thoughtful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.